The first time I saw the ocean was when I was 19 years old, and if I ever see it again, it won't be for a long time. I was a boy then, fresh off the train that brought me from Amarillo to San Diego. The mere sight of all that water and the blind, destructive power of the waves threw me into awe. No, I had seen bodies of water before, including some pretty big lakes, but nothing could compare to this. I probably can't describe my first impression, nor can I say that I want to. You can imagine how I felt when a few weeks later I was given a rifle and put aboard. After I stopped throwing up, I thought that maybe I wouldn't kill myself. To die among those chaotic waves without ever seeing land. At the time, I thought war wasn't so bad compared to this. You can be such a fool when you're young. How glad I was when I saw the island with its solid shores. In the middle of the night, we were put into a boat with rifles and knapsacks. At that, however, they did not say a word. We obeyed the order without complaint. On deck, the lieutenant gave our platoon a briefing. This island was lost. That's exactly what he said. It appeared that this little piece of land, only recently discovered and not yet mapped, might have played an important role in the war on the Pacific Front. It was unlikely, he said, that the Japanese could capture it, as it was too far from their borders. However, during a recent flight over the island's central plateau, something resembling an airfield was spotted. In the middle of the night, we came ashore. I'm not gonna lie, I almost shit myself with fear. I don't know what I was expecting, but it certainly wasn't what we encountered. It was a thick, heavy silence. Except for the sound of the waves and the wind, there was not a sound to be heard on the island. No birds, no insects, only dead silence. After walking another 100 yards into the frightening calm of the jungle, we stopped in a small clearing to wait for the officers. Those too were obviously frightened. I wasn't too bright, but I knew for sure that something was wrong. It seemed as if the whole island was dead. I remember smelling only the smell of the sea, though there were red flowers hanging from the trees. There was no airfield on that plateau. I can't say what it was because I had never seen anything like it in my life. It looked like an Aztec pyramid. I think this description can hardly convey the otherworldliness of that structure. There was no hint of the blocks or bricks of which it was built. Apparently, the pyramid was carved entirely out of giant black stone, after which it was given a distinct geometric shape. To the touch, it was as smooth as obsidian, yet it did not reflect light. It absorbed even the glow of the moon, so it was impossible to see how deep underground it went. It was impossible to focus on any of its details. It was one solid blackness. Our platoon had the honor of exploring the lower levels, and we descended the steps while the rest of the company surrounded the plateau. After the first man who touched the edge of the steps cut his hand to the bone, we walked as slowly and carefully as possible. As we descended the steps, we saw several small stone rooms. They were empty stone cubes with a single hole in the ceiling. There were no doors, and to get into the holes, you had to grab those razor-sharp black edges. We went down from floor to floor, illuminating the rooms with flashlights. There was nothing in them but the same featureless black walls. No dust, no leaves, no other jungle debris. The whole building was immaculately clean, as if it had just been built. There was no way it could be. It seemed incredibly ancient to me, though there was no reason to think so. As we descended to the bottom step of the pyramid, we saw that there was nothing further to go but darkness, which absorbed the light of our flashlights. We threw down a button and then a shell casing. We waited for a long time in the afterlife silence, but not a single sound followed. No one said a word, and we turned away from the gaping abyss and continued to explore the lower ring of the pyramid. We would never have found the corpse, almost invisible in the thick darkness, if a long trail of blood had not been reflected in the light of our flashlights. It led us to the body. The dead man was huddled together with his hands on his knees and his face pressed against them. He was badly shredded, his clothes practically ragged, showing pale skin and in some places bloody bones. He might have been wearing a Japanese military uniform, but it was so tattered that it was not immediately apparent. We had a few seconds to get a good look at him before shots rang out. They sounded like insects buzzing in the jungle, and then they were almost instantly swallowed up by silence. By the time we got upstairs, the rest of the company was gone. There were shell casings lying on the ground. The air was hot with gunpowder, but the men were nowhere to be found. The trees were dead silent, and there was no trace of the 50 men who had come with us to the island. I felt bile rising to my throat. Panic began to overwhelm me. On one side, there was a gaping hole with sharp edges. On the other, the ocean raging. Silence rang in my ears, and I struggled to hold myself together. They were in the jungle, waiting for us. They came out from behind the trees as silently as moths, just slipping into view. I can try to tell you what I saw. You'd probably think the same thing as the army doctor and a dozen other officers, that I'm a dumb dummy, a victim of sunstroke and trauma, that I'm out of my mind. You know me. You know I'm not crazy. I remember every second of that night clearly. The first creature I saw was wearing the skin of a Japanese soldier, blackened and stretched from decomposition. Its head hung off its shoulders, its tongue was swollen, and its eyes were blurred. I saw lacerations in the shrunken flesh. From each hole gaped a blackness darker than the walls of that building. That darkness resembled a fierce cloud. The creature walked slowly, its neck cracking and its head rolling backward. I clutched my rifle tightly in my hands, but I was unable to fire. All I could do was stare at the nightmare approaching us, which somehow resembled my mother's puppets. A gunshot rang out next to me, and I saw a dozen more monsters slowly advancing on us. There were still a few bloated and rotting corpses among them, but most of them wore the same shape as us. Their bodies were pale, fresh, and drenched in blood. A few more bullets whizzed through the air. I saw them hit the vile creatures, but it didn't even slow them down. I saw the glassy eyes of the sergeant, whose head hung limply from his shoulders. I saw the huge laceration in his back and the shuddering darkness that had settled into his body. He lunged at the soldier standing next to me like a ruthless predator. Everyone else began to fall to the ground in a silent dance of kinetic energy and fuzzy movements. When I was in high school, I was on the cross-country team. I didn't need an invitation. I just ran. I ran blindly through the jungle, bumping into tree trunks. I ran until I saw the ocean, and it drove me back into terror. I don't remember how I decided to swim. I only remember that when I turned toward the jungle and saw one of the bloody creatures coming toward me on all fours, my arms stretched out. I threw myself into the ocean. To this day, the thought of the ocean gives me a cold sweat. That night, however, I let the tide carry me out to sea. The waves carried me, and I was relieved to have escaped the impossible monolith and the horrors of the quiet island. I never made it to the war. As soon as I recovered, I was sent home. When I thought no one believed me, it was even a good thing. I was able to convince myself that none of this had happened and everything I saw was a figment of my imagination. But as I got older, I realized that there was no point in lying, especially to myself. I know what I saw. Somebody believed me, though.